In review, the Mariposa County Sheriff's Office, your law enforcement agency, your deputies responded to 32,608 calls for service last year. That equates to 89 calls per day. Wow. So again, you heard me say before, we enjoy the Mayberry-like atmosphere. It's comfortable and supporting, but our law enforcement officers are bleeding on this dirt and being very focused and active to to maintain this environment, this atmosphere that we all appreciate so much. The call load has changed as we discussed a year ago, as we predicted with the California Law Enforcement Realignment, AB 109. Our frequency of violent crime has started to sharply increase. Our jail capacity is full. What did I dictate last year? I said about 2 years. Sooner, we're full. We're maxed out right now. We have classification issues because we have a plethora of gang members in our facility. We have murderers, robbers, rapists. Several of these folks that are committing and are being held accountable by District Attorney Cook and his office in the court system didn't grow up here. They aren't from Mariposa County. But because of AB 109, your tax dollars are now forced to babysitting them at your county jail, sometimes for long periods of time, which creates challenges, which I think we all recognize. So the jail's full. So what does that mean for us? Well, you've noticed it around town, I'm pretty confident. How many of you, I'll ask for a show of hands or comment, have seen an increase in migrating or homeless folks in and around town? Right. How many of you are real nervous and anxious about that? Yeah. How many of you think that all those people are bad and awful people? They are. They are. Some folks that are truly victims of circumstance, I know some myself, that have lost it all. We all can say, well, maybe they made bad decisions, or maybe they invested in the wrong product. But I think we all know good people that have just been chewed up and spit out as a result of the recession. Sad stories. Our foreclosures are still increasing. We have vacant homes. Our vacation houses that were next to us, and I speak as a victim of experience. Not that I have a vacation house, my salary, that's not going to happen. But in my quiet community, I had several vacation houses. Well, because of the recession and the lack of finances, I suspect that those folks had to put in renters. What I'm seeing and what the office is seeing is an influx of law enforcement calls having to deal with the landlords and tenant disputes, because a lot of folks are renting their vacation homes in Mariposa County. We have an amount of those. And they aren't experienced landlords, and they may not do backgrounds, so they end up with people who victimize landlords and properties and things like that. And it's really terrible to see. For those of you who have tenants who are maybe not as professional and polite to another's property, and they're loud and obnoxious and drive you crazy, and you hope that they'll get kicked out or move on. One thing that falls kind of in that venue is marijuana growing, right? You know how much I love the California Compassionate Act, marijuana, the medical marijuana, 215. How many of you, probably never thought you would see this, but how many of you know a marijuana garden in your neighborhood? Quite a few. Good. I expected to see more hands, but I'm not surprised. So many of these gardens still are pretty quiet. They're out of sight, most of them, but we have quite a few that are out in the open. We have a lot more protected medicinal focused marijuana gardens in Mariposa County than you think. We are seeing, I don't want to say routinely, but frequently in the paper and then in our digital media sources, Mariposa people who are arrested for large amounts of marijuana going back east. Right, we just had one that was booked just last week. California produces about 60% of the nation's marijuana crop. Did you know that? Yeah, that's a lot. The trend, I think I talked about this before. I'll touch base on it again just to refresh. You know, the trend for the Mexican cartels was to take advantage of our public lands, the lands that we cherish and recreate in, lands that I take my kids out and we motorcycle ride, we hike, we camp. The lands that I never used to take a gun out on, but you know, I always have a gun when I'm out on our, unfortunately, out enjoying our public lands now because of the cartel threat that has impacted many of us in Mariposa County. The trend when the Medicinal Act was kind of refined was that law enforcement, you know, was fairly successful with camp programs, DOJ support programs to go to the public lands, eradicate that marijuana, you know, try to get the trash and all the chemicals, all that stuff that's ruining that, you know, that habitat out of there. They were losing a significant amount of the crop, not all of it. You know, we were only so good. I think it was 2010, Mariposa County Sheriff's Office eradicated 100,000 marijuana plants from public lands. And we aren't getting it all, of course. But the trend, especially as seen in the Central Valley, that under the protection of the Marijuana Medical Act, the cartels are now renting, leasing, purchasing property and growing under the doctor's recommendation. And that's a huge, it's a big deal. You know, I mean, it's a lot of impact to a community when you have a known marijuana garden. Obviously, you know, kids are curious, they're interested. We were all there, maybe a little longer than you can remember. Some folks, right? You can remember. You know, but regarding the bad guys who impersonated DOJ, right? Went to a known marijuana garden, dressed up with you know, some shaky SWAT clothing, and did a compliance check. They scouted everything out and then went back again and burglarized the place, robbed the place. Our deputies responded to that and arrested those folks again. Tom Steele, one of those folks, in court. That's fairly common, and that's scary. I remember when we were medical marijuana virgins in Mariposa County. We had a garden that was protected under a medicinal script. Parents were the growers. It wasn't a large garden. They've gotten much larger now currently. I don't remember the plant count, but probably in the 20s or 30s. A 16-year-old girl was home alone. Several armed men with loaded firearms hit the door. Again, acted like law enforcement, though we're fairly lucky she wasn't shot. So here's a young high school girl that's getting robbed because her dad, or stepdad, I think, you know, wanted to grow weed. That offends me. I'm pretty offended. We had a serious assault where a gentleman was almost killed. He was robbed. It was a marijuana garden. He was almost beaten to death, all over weed. So other armed robberies for marijuana and guns involved. You know, so my perspective is dangerous, a dangerous venue. Yeah, I don't think it's too healthy for society right now. I know back in the day, back in 1996, there was when there was the push for medicinal marijuana, those pro-marijuana folks painted a picture of, you know, their grandma who was terminally ill with cancer, and this was the only relief that she could find. Who's not sympathetic to that? I am. I mean, I'm sympathetic to that. Do I see law enforcement intervening in that role? Me personally, no. You know, I don't really see that I have a place as your law enforcement officer intervening between a terminally ill patient and, you know, some comfort. But we've been scammed. We've been scammed big time, and we knew it. You know, law enforcement saw it. We just didn't have the money at the time. We had a mini recession back then. Law enforcement didn't have the money to combat and you know, show you the prediction of where medicinal marijuana was going in California. But we're kind of outnumbered in this venue. The big voting populations in California see a little different than I do. I'm okay with it. That's why I live and work in Mariposa County. And I appreciate the majority that recognize or at least see some of these venues the same way I do. We talked about homelessness a bit. I think I touched on Mariposa Open Arms last year, I think a little bit. Maybe not, but I'll throw it out. I do bring up this conversation at times because it's an important one. Mariposa County is a very compassionate county. We are wired to help our neighbor. We're wired to, extend a helping hand. But this has also caused some anxiety and some concern. I hear the terminology, if we build it, they will come, and regarding a homeless shelter or something to that extent. I think maybe there's kind of a happy medium found there where there was a need. We were seeing an influx. It was during winter a year ago. We were seeing an influx of homeless people who were outside in the elements when temperatures were dipping below freezing. And I think any of us want to see someone homeless, visitor, criminal and non-criminal, freeze to death in Mariposa County. So I was part of a group that spoke with several of the county's churches to see if we could assist those folks and not necessarily organize a homeless shelter. I think there is a real concern that and it's voiced to me that it may not be in our best interest to build an organized facility to attract people, but there's nothing wrong in helping our fellow man and helping them along if they're in a time of need in our county at that time. Did you understand what I said? And is that supported by this group? Is that kind of the tone here? That's a message that I have digested throughout the past year on that. So I do bring it up. I think it's one that people don't like to talk about. It's like, well, gosh, we should help that person, but I don't want them, living next to me attitude. And that's real. I mean, we can be honest with ourselves. I understand it. Sex offenders need a place to live, but I don't want to live next to my kids. Right? We talked about jail overcrowding, and this is an issue that I can stand before you and say, well, yes, jail overcrowding is a big issue, and we're going to build a bigger jail, right? You know what that's going to do to your pocketbook and to the county's finances, right? I stand in front of you, fairly well educated in this venue, that building a bigger jail is not the smartest decision for our county. Right now, the county's been, in my perception, of course, I'm a little biased. I'm law enforcement focused. My role is pretty easy. I want to keep our community safe, and my blinders are on. So I want all the dollars to be able to maintain a safe community, keep your loved ones safe, keep your children safe, and the other folks have to fight for their own money. So I continue to fight for law enforcement dollars. However, I can tell you a bigger jail right now with California Title 15, which frames inmate rights and the services we need to provide to them, needs to be modified before we build a bigger jail, because it would bankrupt the county. We can't afford to staff a bigger jail, even if I was able to find a grant that didn't require a match at any cost. We couldn't staff a larger jail. Our current jail was built in 1995 and is a 58-bed maximum security facility, and I have 19 employees that oversee 58 bagpipes. We foresaw that with the realignment that our bad guy face would change. It would change from, maybe our misdemeanor, multi-misdemeanor convicted individual, drug addict, maybe some mental health issues. That consistent picture that fills the majority of county jails throughout the nation would then look somewhat of would escalate to a more hardened career criminal, tattoos, lengthy criminal history, and in custody on felonies. And that's what's happened. Not only just over the last year since this started, but really the last 4 months. The change was that quick. And we saw it coming. We knew it was going to come. County leaders got together and spent state funds as best we could to basically put in place overflow programs to really help prop up these folks that we're not going to have room in jail, your less serious offenders, folks that, we feel hopefully are not going to re-offend and hurt you and steal your property. But they need to be supervised and they need to be in a program. The core facility in town has taken that, that framework. Basically, what has occurred with that facility is that the CCP, the Community Corrections Program, which is a new program funded by the state. Mariposa County got over $300,000 for that. That's not a lot of money. Let me tell you, that's not a lot of money, because in one medical event, it cost us over $100,000 for one inmate, for one medical event. So to give you, that's how fast those dollars go. But Mariposa County got over $300,000 to deal with this overflow. The CCP was birthed to that. It'd basically be a daily reporting center. I think most of you are familiar with daily reporting centers. It's for folks that would have been in jail a couple of years ago, that are very low on the reoffending, scale. Not a threat to society, but they just, they are working against odds that maybe you and I don't have to deal with. There's some dependency issues, maybe some mental health issues. They just need a little extra help in society to prop them up, to support them, to keep them on the right track. Can you kind of picture that population? Because there's a lot of them. The mental health population, folks, it's been a dirty word for decades. The mental health population is huge. It's absolutely huge. I often think to have a career in California in law enforcement during this time frame, I probably mental health candidate myself. But nationally, it's estimated that 64% of all inmates nationwide, all inmates in jails, suffer from some mental health issue or the other. That's real, and it may even be higher here in Mariposa County. Your local county jails and the California prison system is basically babysitting the majority of the mental health population. Because there haven't been resources. There's not resources. People have feared to address that issue. But I got to tell you, it's a real issue. We need to recognize it. We don't have, your jail doesn't have the capacity to babysit, and I use that, I use that not derogatory, right? But to care for these people, this county needs to be funded. We need to have professionals to appropriately care for that population. And we can't expect our law enforcement and our correction officers to do that. We're not trained. We don't have the facilities to do that. And it's a big issue. If you disagree with me, I'd love to hear from you. But I ask you to digest this, because I'm pretty confident I know what I'm talking about in this topic, in this venue. And it's a really serious issue. That dovetails right into firearms. I know we're here to talk about guns and our rights and the good citizen. Our politicians, I fear, again, at times have missed the mark. And I know many of us in this community, because of our values and focus, share that same concern. Again, there is a population within us, and it's a small population, that needs extra enforcement, that needs extra focus. The good law-abiding citizen does not need to, to be crammed up in a smaller room with laws that they need to follow regarding firearms. It's not going to work. California is known for some of the strictest firearm laws in the nation. The UCR, the Uniform Crime Reporting System, indicates that 3.25, so basically 3 people per 100,000 have been killed by a firearm in California. That's a lot of people. California has a lot of hundreds of thousands of people. That's 5 times more likely to be assaulted with a gun. You are 5 firearm in California than some other states with less firearm related. 4 times more likely to be robbed at gunpoint than other states with less firearm laws and regulations. So I don't think it takes a scientist to recognize the law-abiding citizen isn't the population that we need to focus on. That's not the guide. That's not the blip on the radar. It's the evil and the mentally ill. And folks, there's evil people out there. We know. Yeah. I worked on Kerry Stainer homicides. I dedicated many years of my life to put that guy on death row. That guy's evil. There's evil people out there. And he's a firearm. There's evil people out there. And there's a huge population of mentally ill folks that are good people. They have great careers. They are good fathers, good mothers, but they weren't blessed, you know, with all the capacities that you or I may have. And everything is harder for them, and they just need a little extra help. Some folks that, you know, in that venue shouldn't have this. And as your law enforcement leader in Mariposa County, that's a population that we need to focus on. My deputies aren't knocking on your doors with no criminal history, you know, with no dependency issue, with no records, right? And saying, you know, you shouldn't have more than 500 bullets. You shouldn't have this gun. It's none of my business. That's my two. The California State Sheriff's Association, my sheriff, the 58 sheriffs of the state, authored a letter to the Vice President, to Joe Biden. And I hope all of you have read that. That's available on my website. I also brought a couple copies if you're interested in that. The letter was really well written, and I think really conveyed my point. Sometimes it's hard to articulate every thought. You know, it was really accurate and conveyed our thoughts. And I hope the politicals listen. You know, and we'll see. We're going to see what happens. But I'm not saying, you know, leave it as it is. And, you know, put on the blinders. You know, this is a huge issue. I understand. So continue voicing what your beliefs are. And that's very necessary. I suspect that there'll be a compromise at some point because the numbers are out there. I mean, there's a large voting populace. There's a large chunk of elected politicians that may not see this exactly like you or not. But this just is a perfect example of a big government, right, and local control. Because we know what works for us. We know what we need to maintain a safe community. We know we're an ag community, right? And most of us have firearms at the house, for rattlesnakes in the yard, for the bear in the trash that's scared away, and maybe for the bad guy. But that's your right. And I took an oath to protect them. It's a hot issue. But I think also it's important to let, you know, the Newtown tragedy, and I'm being very transparent on this. Again, as father of 4. I'll tell you a story. It might bring a tear to your eye. I don't know. Probably mine. I still don't think we as a nation, as individuals, have been able to digest exactly, you know, what happened in Newtown. That is so tragic. In my own mind, who's been in law enforcement for 23 years, it is hard to digest what occurred there. And any of these major killings, but when you insert kid into that victimization, it just is not normal. My kids, my wife, we're a Christian family. We believe in morals. My wife had a successful career. She graduated from Purdue. She was an aviation pilot. She made more money than me, but we wanted to try to raise a family as, you know, as traditionally and correct as we felt, my wife and I. So we decided that, you know, it was time to have kids. We were blessed with kids. So she would leave her career, sacrifice her career, be a stay-at-home mom, raise kids, and you know, pray, hope for the best. We try to shelter our kids as realistically as we can. We do have a TV. You know, the kids have technology, and you know, it's just incredible to see the sophistication that, you know, the internet, you know, that our smart devices brings to our youth at such a small age. An example of that, you know, when the Twin Towers were demolished, it was not healthy. I felt it wasn't healthy for my kids to see that imagery over and over and over again. My son, I think, was 8 at the time. He was afraid to fly. I don't blame him, you know. And for a kid to express that, I mean, that's a big deal. He'd been around planes. I flew, my wife flew. So, you know, that's a mental note. Well, the Newtown tragedy, we really tried to limit the media so the kids, our kids, weren't impacted with that. I thought we had done okay. I mean, I know we can't filter everything. My 7-year-old, she's a doll, blonde girl, smart, drives a big motorcycle, and she's really cool. My wife was driving her to Woodland School, and she goes, "Mom, will you come to my funeral if I die at school today?" I'm not making this up. You know, you can imagine what my wife did. She's just
got a headache today.
Yeah. You know, so there's you know, some really deep issues in our country, and we're not gonna solve them as a community, but we can make sure we get our family through this and get our neighbors through this, right? We keep ourselves safe, and I know there's other communities like Mariposa scattered throughout the chaos in this nation. Well, we're going to prevail. We are. It's going to work out. But we have to voice what's right. Right? We have to voice our compass and our fundamental rights as Americans. And you know, I think that's what this group is doing, and I appreciate that, and I urge you to continue. And selfishly, I ask you to recognize the efforts that your local law enforcement is doing, not just county, but we have state and federal officers too. And you know, these guys are working really hard. They really believe in what they're doing. Your county officers, the county doesn't have the money, but they aren't compensated what they're providing to you. They aren't compensated their work, but they're here day and night, 24 hours a day, doing the best they can. And we hire good officers. Guy and gals, they're out there day and night, catching the bad guy, responding to your calls, 89 calls a day, every day, 89 calls a day, to make this community what it is. So wave at them if you can. Some are good wavers, some aren't. I asked that they all wave. We know who we work for. But they're really learning that. You know, because of finances, right before the recession, we had this huge, and you knew the problem, we were a training ground. We never were like that before. We're a progressive department. We have great equipment. It's a successful community. The community likes their law enforcement. You support them. That means a lot in where you want to work. You feel valued. I mean, your product is valued. That makes you feel good. You sleep well at night. But they have, you know, these folks have to provide for their families. And we had such a hard time keeping employees that weren't already, you know, invested in the community, that didn't already own their home, and had kids rooted in the community. The folks, you know, couldn't, on the salary, they couldn't buy a house. They couldn't get rooted because, you know, the funds weren't there, and they could go out and get bigger money elsewhere. And so they're going to follow that money. They're young. The recession came. Oh, and well, let me back up. Because of that, you were seeing a different face, a face you didn't recognize. You feel in a lot of the sheriff vehicles. They're still doing a professional job. They're still doing a great job. But they were new to the community, and you know, may or may not have appreciated their approach all the time. But there's a difference between an officer that you know, right, that your kids go to school with their kids, or you know them personally, or they're your neighbor. I mean, there's that connection, that rapport is vital. The recession hit all of California. There was law enforcement laid off everywhere, and basically the exodus stopped. So majority of my officers now have all been on for 5 years, and they're really dialed in. They're experienced. You recognize them now. You know, they understand the vibe and the focus of the community. Society dictates their level of law enforcement, and it takes a little bit for an officer to recognize, you know, that tone. Well, they're there. I'm really proud of their product. I don't want to go through that again. I say selfishly. So give them a wave, right? Let them know you appreciate it. If you do, be genuine. If you appreciate their service, let them know, and they'll probably exchange some kind words with you too. Our relationship, and I shared this last year too. We have a board member here today, John Carrier, District 5. He's my district supervisor in the back. Our board of supervisors have always been supportive. Well, not always, but since I've been sheriff, I felt that they've been very supportive of the department. And there really hasn't been money. But I feel comfortable, and I think we're making some really good movement. and the recognition that Mariposa County wants to maintain their safe environment, wants to be safe and not worry about their loved ones being harmed to and from school, you know, or gang members in school, things like that. You know, it takes effort. And, you know, I'm bound to do my best to maintain that environment for you. And I think the board really recognizes that. And I recognize in their language, and they're often sharing it, that they're doing what they can to help support that. And I appreciate that. So I want to pass on that note. I know it's a sin to talk too long, so I think we'll cut it there. Time's more